Welcome back to ADHD Conversations. I'm Dr. Kristen Stuppy, and I'm here with my co-host, Sara Whelan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Each month, we bring you conversations with experts, parents, and individuals passionate about ADHD, learning differences, and mental health, all who have a focus on real-life strategies that help families thrive.
And today, we're really excited to introduce Sean McCormick, the founder of Executive Function Specialist. He is a certified special education teacher, an executive function coach, and an education consultant who's worked with students all over the world to strengthen skills like organization, time management, and self-advocacy.
Yeah. Sean is also the founder of the Executive Functioning Coaching Academy and is an experienced podcaster as the past host of Earn More Tutoring. He leads professional trainings for educators and families about building strong executive functioning systems that set students up for success.
And some really great news. He is going to be joining us live for an ADHD KC parent group presentation called Creating a Blueprint for Successful Semester for High School Students. That will be held on Tuesday, January 13th at 6:30 Central Time. It, as always, is free and online via Zoom, so you can join from anywhere. And you can sign up now at ADHDKC on our event page.
Sean, welcome to ADHD KC Conversations.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here chatting with you both and just excited to be supporting your community, and hopefully we can share some things that help people support their kids and make life a little bit easier.
Yes. Yeah, we're so glad you're here. Let's get started with your background. You've worn a lot of hats in your life as a teacher, coach, parent, consultant, and podcast host. What inspired you to focus on executive function and start Executive Functioning Specialist?
Yeah, great question. So what inspired me to start was I always loved education. Right out of high school, I did a program called City Year, which was a year-long volunteer program where I worked in the public school system in New York City. It's all over the country and even in different countries. But some people describe it as like the domestic Peace Corps. And basically, I spent a year volunteering in the public school system and realized just how important like mentors and support figures were in the system. So after I earned my bachelor's degree, I went back to get my master's degree in special education because my first job out of college was working as a substitute teacher in Buffalo Public Schools in New York. And I just realized that people call it like your zone of genius. It's like the thing that feels easy, but you're also good at. That for me was always helping kids learn difficult things, even kids who really struggled, because I could empathize and relate as a child who grew up with undiagnosed ADHD. And so I really valued mentors that could help me understand things. And so it just felt natural and meaningful to give that back. So after earning my master's degree in special education, I became a public school special education teacher, first in Buffalo, and then back in my home school in California. And the more work I did with students, was running what's known as a counseling-enriched classroom. So I had students who were returning from residential treatment programs and all placed in one classroom with me for the full day. So it was a very varied group of students, grades 9 through 12, with all different special learning needs. And I realized that there was no way for me to tell each one of them what to do throughout the day and give all of them individualized attention like nonstop. But what I could do is I could help them identify their long-term goal, or what I call their light at the end of the tunnel, and then help them set up actionable small steps they could take throughout the day that I could check in and support and kind of nudge them when they were stuck. I had 2 educators I was working with in the classroom. And so I realized like the only way to truly support learners is to help them feel an intense sense of ownership over their goals. At the time, I didn't know that was executive functioning because it's not talked about in the school system. But as my wife and I had our first child, I was like, I need work that's a little bit more flexible, where I can be valued for what I do, but not have to necessarily, I needed more flexible work. So I started what I thought was tutoring. And the more tutoring I did, the more referrals I would get from neuropsychologists who would say, Sean is the pro at helping with executive functioning. And they would put me in their recommendations in their reports. And so I was like, oh, wow, I guess I started to research it and learn more about it. And I was like, oh, executive functioning is like goal-directed persistence. It's being able to self-regulate. Like these are all things I've always helped kids with. So I reframed what I was doing from tutoring to executive function coaching. I felt that my master's in special education and years and as a teacher gave me the credibility to provide those services as much as anybody else. And so I've been doing that for 6 years, and it's been really transformational for so many students and families when they understand what executive function is and how challenges with self-regulation or task initiation can impair them from being able to get going, and that there are strategies, which we'll talk about here today, that can make a world of difference if someone's able to step in and provide what I call like the most important next step, or put something in the zone of proximal development. I think I just kind of fell into it and gravitated towards the thing that I loved. And then I learned that there was a name for it, and have been doing it ever since.
Well, that's really incredible that you were teaching executive functioning skills before you even knew what executive functioning skills were. I think that says a lot for how intuitive that you see what these kids are going through. And you've now, come from being a substitute teacher to having your own classroom full of kids with a variety of needs. And now you have this program that teaches students across the country. So what's your approach when you work with these kids who are struggling to stay organized or motivated? What's your magic sauce?
Yeah, it's a good question. The secret, I think, to helping kids, and we've worked with, people don't come to us because things are going well or perfect. They come because they're exhausted. They've tried everything. They've tried tutors. They've tried therapy. And sometimes it's a combination of all those things that are necessary. But everything they've tried hasn't really worked. And also the school system has said, well, they just need to focus, or they just need to put in more effort, or, they've got to take responsibility at some point. And the parent's like, I'm doing everything I can. And they're just burnt out. And the first thing is understanding that it's not the kid's fault or the parent's fault or even the school's fault to some degree, because executive functioning is not mainstream. It's not something that we have common core standards for reading and math, but we don't have common core standards for like self-organization, which research shows. If you look up the research of Dr. Adele Diamond, who wrote the paper Executive Functions, which is one of the most cited research papers across all scientific disciplines, it shows that executive functions skills are the key predictor to academic success more than reading or writing. And I could show you that, or anyone can just go look that paper up and see that research. But executive function skills predict success in school and life outcomes as well. Yet they're never talked about in school almost at all. I mean, there are some schools, yes, that have a curriculum or do something, but it is definitely the exception and not the rule. So in order to effectively support these families, first off, you have to take the burden that off their shoulders that like we did something wrong, or like, or blaming even the schools, even though schools should do something, but that's going to take time for people to recognize this. So taking that first, like, hey, this isn't your fault, and these are skills. So we have to first like help people see that this is not a innate issue. It's something that can be taught and developed, but it's not being done so right now. So when we help them put on that growth mindset cap, instead of just saying like, my child's a failure and there's nothing we can do, and help them see like, this is possible, but it will take time, it will take energy, and you're kind of doing this not without the support necessarily of the school system. So once they recognize that, and we have what we call like qualifying questions, things like, hey, are you willing to focus on progress, not perfection? Because this is not something I teach you executive function skills and now you know them and life goes on. This is a process. So the first step is like accepting the nature of executive skill development, which is going to be an ongoing process. And life is going to get harder. Therefore, we're going to need to develop new EF skills to manage college, careers, relationships, all those things. So the first step is kind of what I call a conceptual change, which is also research by John Hattie has shown that conceptual changes have one of the biggest impacts on student achievement. So that's the first step. And then I would say the second step is helping families and students identify their one thing. So families and students come in with like, I need to fix this. And like, there's so many issues that are popping up, but typically, especially when it relates to school, we want to identify like, what's that one thing that's just making school hell and difficult and, basically untenable. And when you can identify that, then you can start to show progress on that specific thing, which kind of unlocks a sense of confidence in the student and family. And then you can move on to more higher order skills. So what we do with students and families is we say, okay, like you've shared everything you want to focus on. Now, if we could just focus on one thing for the next 12 weeks, and typically that's like missing assignments or failing grades, and develop the skills to help you self-manage that with support, how would you feel, right? They get bought in, like, well, I'd feel relief, I'd feel happy. And that taps into that nonverbal working memory where they're starting to create a visual outcome and an emotional connection with that outcome that activates the reticular activation system, which helps them pick up information that will help them reach their goal. So now that's like a lot of information. We can dig into that, but that's kind of the magic sauce. It's not really magic. It's just brain science and prioritization But that's how we approach it.
And families come in and I'm sure they're just overwhelmed by where to start. So having that process is so helpful. And like you mentioned, this term executive function, it's families don't know about it, right? Like I had the privilege of being a school psychologist. I had to learn about it, but it felt very lonely in schools, right? Because it's just not taught in a widespread manner. So when you have families come in, or maybe if they're not sure if their child has some struggles with executive functioning, like how can parents recognize, like maybe this is something that we need to get help for? Or what are some early signs you would encourage families to look for?
Yeah, I think it's always best to try to get some type of assessment done. So, for example, I'm sure you played a role in a lot of those during your 17 years in the school system, but especially for public school parents, you can request an assessment at no cost to you. If you're not happy with the assessment or you don't feel like it provides enough detail around the areas of difficulty, such as executive functioning, you can request an IEE or independent educational assessment at no cost to you. Now, this is not easy. School districts often don't make this easily accessible or tell you about your rights, but if you look into it a little bit, you can find out more about it and get the templates for requesting these things. So I think the first step is like if you're noticing things over an extended period of time, like missing assignments across, and you don't have to wait for years. You can start to, I would say, always document, put it in writing. Like if you notice that even with your support and with like a planner that the school gave to your child, if your kid continues to miss assignments, struggles with things that are kind of normal expectations, like completing their work, following up on things, asking for help. If those things aren't happening, those expected behaviors, document it, ask for help. I talk about kind of like working your way through the system. So start with their teacher, right? Instead of going straight to the superintendent, start with their teacher, raise your concerns, see what they say, try the intervention or suggestions they make. If that doesn't work, then you raise it to maybe like the school counselor or, the next level of authority. And you keep working your way up while documenting all this. And hopefully someone in that chain of command is responsive and starts to either provide an assessment. You should make that request at some point. If I would also, when you request that assessment, say, I would like to do a specific assessment around executive functioning. So there's different types of subtests, like the brief that can evaluate executive function skills. So I would probably do a little research. We have plenty of articles on efspecialist.com around what you can request. And kind of getting data on it. But then once you've had that data, then you can start to request services and goals that would remediate the executive function deficits. So if the assessment shows that your child does have executive function challenges, then you could say, well, can we have a resource class, right? Or can we have a 504 if you want a lower level intervention before you move into an individualized education program? So it's a lot of information. Special ed is a very complex and tiered system. Schools are required to have a multi-tiered system of supports and interventions. A lot of them just don't even have that in place. According to the law, they should be having these tiered systems where they can evaluate this and then slowly move them into that. But as a parent, you're going to have to be on it. Or if you don't feel comfortable with this and don't know how to navigate this, there's a thing called COPA, which is the Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys. You can find a local special education advocate or advocate for students with special needs that have executive function challenges. And you can work with someone like that so that they can guide you through the process should it feel overwhelming to you.
That's a lot right there. I remember as a parent how hard it was to get schools to give any kind of accommodations, or they didn't offer testing. I didn't ask for testing. We could do testing elsewhere because I'm privileged enough to be able to do that for my children. Mm-hmm. But it's a good point that you make that the schools should be doing this for our kids. And I do think that parents have to keep documentation, as you mentioned, and then be that thorn in the administration's side to really make them do what they need to be doing.
And Dr. Stuppy, if I could just add one thing to that, the other part that makes it really challenging for parents of kids with ADHD is that there are 13 categories of disability in the education system, and ADHD is not one of them. Even though ADHD is a disability, it's not categorized as a disability that qualifies a student for special education services. So ADHD has to be impacting education to such a degree that the ADHD falls into a category of other health impairment, or OHI. Or it could be impacting their reading or their writing or some other thing. So it would fall into another category called SLD, or specific learning disability. So this makes it extra difficult for parents because ADHD is, for some reason, not a specific disability category. And so you have to really navigate the nuances in this scenario in order to get your child who has ADHD appropriately served in the system. And I was mentioning a study by Dr. John Hattie. He wrote the book Visible Learning, which it looked at over 250 million students globally and over 800 meta-analyses on what works in education. And he identified the top factors that influence student achievement. And then at the bottom were things that negatively impact student achievement. And the greatest negative impact on student achievement of all these studies across the globe, 250 million students combined, was ADHD across the entire globe. So I only share that because research shows ADHD can have such a negative impact on student outcomes, yet it's not even identified as a disability that can be categorized, allows students to access special education services. So there's a lot of work there to be done, but ultimately that's all to say, like, if they tell you that your kid should just focus more or whatever feedback you get, just remember, like, no one's going to fight for your kid like you need to. You're going to have to be their best advocate or work or build your team. If you know it's real and you see them struggling with it, don't let them write you off.
Something that really does stand out in your work is your focus on building self-advocacy. And, a lot of students, even my own daughters, throughout their school years have hesitated sometimes to ask for help for different reasons, right? They may just want to, it may be like, I don't want them to know I wasn't paying attention, or I feel dumb because I'm sure they've already repeated it a few times, but I still don't remember. What are some ways you help, students stand up for themselves, advocate?
Yeah. So thanks for asking. So I have worked with a lot of students who struggle to communicate their needs. They manufacture reasons why they shouldn't do it. The teacher is going to feel bothered. I'll just ask them in class. I should just know this. They probably said it and I forgot it, right? So they kind of create this narrative of why they shouldn't, which is just how the brain works when you have ADHD or a disability, and even people with anxiety. It's often related to anxiety. You get these automatic negative thoughts. And so I was constantly trying to figure out, like, how can I help these students feel a little more comfortable advocating for themselves? Because self-advocacy is like, it's like a pillar skill. Like, if you can unlock that, you can get a lot done. But if you can't advocate for yourself, it becomes hard to navigate the world. I was like, one of the main strategies I've taught to students is they often have anxiety around in-person interactions. And as a coach who works with them online or outside of the classroom, it's really difficult to monitor and assess with fidelity whether or not they talk to their teachers, because they might just say it, but how do you prove it? So I was like, what is a framework I could develop, a model that would help them communicate? Because most kids don't know how to even write their thoughts. They'll put like a subject line with no body in an email and just say something. And so I came up with this framework called PING. And I was like, and I use it especially with my autistic students who they needed kind of structure in order to communicate effectively. And so PING stands for, you start with a pleasant introduction. P, hi teacher, I hope you're doing well. And I teach students, like, when you start with something like that, rather than just going straight into a demand, you help lower the teacher's affective filter so they're more open to supporting you, right? So, hi teacher, hope you're doing well. Hope you had a great summer. Then you go into the I in PING, which is inform and inquire. I noticed that my grade in your class is a D. I see I have these 3 missing assignments. If I start with this one, which I see has the greatest point value, can I still turn this in for credit? Because, it's past due, right? So they're informing and they're inquiring. The N stands for negotiate. Then they might say, if I turn all 3 into you by this date, can I raise my grade from a D to a C or a B, whatever they want, right? They're making an executive decision and working with their teacher. And then the G stands for gratitude. They say, thank you for your guidance. So I just teach students, like, these little things, these are soft skills that no one's going to teach you, or, I'm going to try to teach you right now, but these aren't taught necessarily. And these things can be the difference between a teacher who's like, nope, don't want to work with you. I'm tired. I've already dealt with 100 students today. Or like, let me make an accommodation for this kid. I help students create those emails, but then I help them save them as templates. So in Gmail, you can save an email as a template and then just change the teacher's name around and insert the correct, different assignments. And so when I teach them not only how to structure these types of communication, but then how to save them as templates so they can reuse them and navigate school effectively, not only does it give them confidence, it helps them realize that they can advocate for themselves, but it also makes it easy, right? It's not like I have to like cognitively build an email every time. They're just like, oh, I can just use this one. So that's a strategy that I think has been really effective for a lot of kids who struggle to communicate. And it's really powerful because then the teachers respond and they go, of course, yeah, no problem. And they see that their communication also gets them the results. And so this creates an ability to generalize the skill of self-advocacy because they see they're not going to get punished for communicating. They're actually going to get rewarded for it. And so it helps them kind of generalize it and apply it across different scenarios.
I love that. That ping is such a great tool for parents even to help their students maybe at home work with. If students need help figuring out what they could say that could be that gratitude, or to identify the problem in a way they can write it down and negotiate what they want. Because a lot of people have a hard time asking. They don't feel value enough in themselves to ask for something they feel like they should have. So that's fantastic. And that's something they can learn during their academic years and bring forward into their workforce years.
100%.
Because those are just good communication skills for anybody. That's fantastic.
Yeah. And when parents ask me, what are these skills? What are executive function skills? I came up with this acronym called POSITIVE because most people don't know what they are. And so there's so many definitions out there, and there's lots of great definitions, but I broke down what executive function skills are. And these are what are called durable skills or employability skills. So POSITIVE stands for planning, organization, self-management or self-advocacy, initiation, time management. I'm starting to call it time awareness because you can't manage time. It just happens, but you can be aware of it. Time awareness, inhibition, or being able to not eat the cookie that would make you tired or, give you a burst. So inhibition, visualizing outcomes or using your nonverbal working memory to visualize where you want to be in 6 months or a year. And then E is evaluating priorities. And that's how I help parents understand these are the skills that kids are going to be developing as they engage in these activities of learning how to effectively manage school, negotiate with their teachers, advocate for themselves, things like that.
I got through medical school with mnemonics. So all of these pings and positive acronyms, they're perfect, memorable ways for kids and their parents to understand that big picture of things.
That's how I got through math classes.
Yeah. It's great for kids. It's great for kids with working memory challenges, right? Like a lot of kids with executive function, it's a working memory issue. But if you can create a model, you don't have to rely on memory. It's more on visualization. And it's a strategy, right? Of, people who have endured very challenging academic situations. So that's another skill, that playing with information. That's a really valuable executive skill that we want to foster in students.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of brings me to studying. I have a teenager and a tween at my house. And, of course, we learned a long time ago that we get very frustrated if I'm trying to help them. But we're always, my husband and I are like, have you studied? What do you have to do? And we get just as frustrated by it. And then, of course, this makes it harder for them. They're just as frustrated. And I think, it's common. Parents often tell us, our kids just don't even know how to study, right? What goes into that there's actually something to it. Why do you think studying is so hard for many students and even those who are neurotypical?
Yeah, it's a great question. Studying is hard. It's like sustained attention. Okay, let's start with the big picture. Why is studying hard? Because society is set up in a way to people who seek immediate reinforcement, and studying is delayed reinforcement, right? It's you have to sustain attention, and the smartest minds in our society are focused on creating tools like our phone that provide immediate gratification. And so we have to fight these algorithms and tools that are deployed to steal our attention. So that's probably why it's so hard to some degree, I think, is that, and especially, the teen brain, even the normal teen brain, one's not impacted by ADHD or executive dysfunction. The frontal lobe is the last part of the brain to develop, according to research. So that long-term planning and sustained attention skills are underdeveloped in children and young adults. So that's why it's hard in my estimation as to why everybody struggles with it. It's more difficult for students with ADHD and special needs because the executive function delays are often more significant, which just makes it more challenging. And then I will say the other thing is that because of executive function challenges, many students with ADHD and autism struggle with what's known as saliency, or the ability to determine what is most salient or useful to focus on and what is less relevant. And so the brain is magical in that we have this thing called the reticular activation system. And the reticular activation system is what's known as the brain's executive assistant or the brain's bouncer. And the reticular activation system is in the brainstem, and it's where all the sensory tracts lead into. So visual information, kinesthetic, auditory, all it leads into the reticular activation system, and then disseminates these signals or into the brain, right? And so we're receiving about 50 million bits of information per second, but we can only consciously process about 50. So we need to train the reticular activation system to bring in information that is associated with our goals and outcomes that we seek to achieve. So one of the challenges that students have is that they have not determined or kind of like implanted in their brain's GPS what they want to get from studying. So they probably have this broad idea that I want to do well. I don't want my parents to be mad at me, right? But they haven't actually set a clear goal. If you're going to put something into MapQuest or Google Maps or whatever, you put the destination in and then it routes you there, based on the destination. So the first step that students need to do to be successful is input a clear destination that they want, a measure of success by which their studying efforts can be compared to. So that's the first step, is most kids just never do this. They don't say like, here's what I want out of the results. And so an easy win for students is like, let's say you're studying for a math final, is say, hey, I want to earn an 85% or higher on this math final, like writing that down. Now, Dr. Gail Matthews of Dominican University found that in a study of over 200 participants who wrote down their goals were 42% more likely to achieve them just by writing it down, right? And I think this is really true for students too. If you write down what you want, you just immediately increase the likelihood of achieving that outcome because you set a destination, right? The next step I would suggest students to do is do this for each final or class or whatever you're studying for. Determine what the destination is. DOD, definition of done. Where do you want to get? Then you can evaluate, okay, what's the most important steps I can take to get that? Now, what I do with students is, let's use the math example. They want to earn an 85% or better on their math final. Okay, so what we do is we ask the teacher, okay, do you have any practice tests that I can take to self-evaluate my knowledge on this subject, right? Or on this final. Typically teachers have it. If they don't have it at this point with ChatGPT, you could say, hey, this is the focus of my math final. Give me 10 questions related to this that I can practice on. So you can, there's no reason to not access what you need to do to be successful at this point. Then the student should take that practice test and evaluate. And we use this thing called an error log. So basically on this log, it's what do I know? What do I somewhat know? And what do I not know? So when they take that math prep test, they identify which questions they don't know. And then they try to categorize, like maybe this one was around fractions or something. So if I got all the fractions one runs wrong, I put that in the don't know column. Maybe I only got part of it wrong because I didn't change the positive to negative. So that might be in the somewhat know column. And then if you got everything else right, you put that in the know column. Once you have that data on where you know what you don't know and what you somewhat know, then you focus your efforts on the thing you don't know. This is called targeted instruction or targeted practice. And this is the skill that really separates people who do amazing things with their talents from those who don't. If you look at the most successful musician or gymnast or whatever it may be, when they figure out what they don't know, they identify the missing sub skill and they focus on that one thing until they've tweaked that and they move it into the somewhat know or no column. And then they go back and reevaluate what they don't know. And this is challenging. This is not easy. This is why you need instructors and coaches and people who can help you figure this out. But if you can approach studying in this manner, where you're looking for the gaps in your knowledge and then you're doing targeted remediation in those missing areas. And for example, once you identify, oh, I didn't know fractions, therefore I'm going to do 10 problems just on fractions to relearn that skill, then you kind of master it and then you move on to the next thing. Now, I'm not saying this is easy, but this is the secret. Because the mistake the students make is that they study everything, they get exhausted, and then they still fail the test because they didn't figure out what they didn't know. So if you can approach things like this, at first it's going to feel very challenging. But once you do it a few times and you get in the habit of taking your practice test, figuring out the weaker areas, and then addressing those until you've generalized the skill, you can learn really anything. And it also creates that growth mindset because you're like, oh, I can learn this. I just need to focus on the sub skill.
That's a great reminder. We always hear the old adage, just study harder doesn't work. Having those strategies, very, very helpful.
Yeah. And I do want to share that. I know that was a lot. I'm just giving people everything right now. If you don't feel like you got that, on my website, I have a series of articles on, I can share it with you all after. So, and it will be part of the presentation, access to this and a handout with all this. But I have a series of free articles on exactly how to break down studying in this methodology with templates that you can use to like build this into your plan.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I'm taking notes for my own family. Yes, for us too.
So looking forward to your talk.
I cannot wait. Yeah. Before we wrap up, what's one small thing or step parents can take this week to support their child's executive function skills?
I love that question. Oh, man, there's a lot of good ones. One thing I've been doing recently, because the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, they said adults can facilitate the development of kids' executive function skills by modeling routines, providing a stable and supportive environment, and there was something else I can't remember, but those two are good enough. Modeling behaviors, creating routines and providing a stable and supportive environment. And one thing I think parents can do that's a really low lift, it's going to require some vulnerability, but it's not difficult to do, is validate your child for who they are. So say something like, I'm really proud to be your parent, right? So much of the relationship is, if you get an A, then I'll love you, right? Or then I'll show you I appreciate you. But our kids have inherent self-worth or an inherent value. And oftentimes they've just started to feel like grades are more important than their relationship with their parent. And so if we can kind of pull back and start by like valuing them. And so I have what I call an order of operations for effective executive skill development, PEMDAS. And the P in PEMDAS is my order of operations for coaching. It stands for prioritizes secure connection. So show them you value them by saying, I'm proud to be your parent, and let them know that you value them. And then you can focus on the E in PEMDAS, which is establish SMART goals. But it can't be like tit for tat. Like if you get good grades, then I show you I love you. It's got to be like, I love you. I want to support you.
That is just fantastic.
Yeah.
All these little nibbles we're getting. I cannot wait for the actual talk.
I know. If we weren't recording, I'd be like taking some notes.
Yeah, I'm glad you're excited. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, we cannot wait to have you. And for anyone who wants to keep learning, remember to please join Sean for creating a blueprint for a successful semester for high school students on Tuesday, January 13th, 2026, 6:30 Central Time. It's free, online. It's going to be packed with actionable tools for parents and students. You can register today at ADHDKC.org on our event list page, and we have the link in the episode description as well.
And Sean, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom. I can't wait for your upcoming ADHD KC parent talk. I think parents are going to walk away with a whole new framework for supporting their teens.
You're very welcome. And thank you, Dr. Stuppy and Sara, for inviting me on. I'm really glad I could be here, and I'm looking forward to the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. And our ADHD KC community, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, follow us on our social media accounts, and check out all of our upcoming events at ADHDKC.org.